Hello, Virgo. Something is landing, not arriving gradually, not building slowly toward a visible conclusion the way most things build. Landing. The specific weight and finality of something that has been airborne for a very long time, finally making contact with solid ground. You are going to feel it when it does. I want to begin with an honest question before we go anywhere else. Do you know what you have actually been waiting for? Not the surface version, not the answer you would give if someone asked you casually. The real answer, the one that lives underneath the named desire, underneath the specific thing you have been hoping for, the deeper need that the specific thing is actually trying to satisfy. Sit with that for a second, because what is coming in this reading is larger than the specific thing on the surface. It reaches down into that deeper layer, and understanding what that layer actually is will change how fully you are able to receive what is arriving. Let me describe what I am looking at. A locked box, heavy, clearly containing something of significant weight based on how it sits on the surface beneath it, and around this box a particular quality of energy that I can only describe as accumulated potential. The kind of charge that builds when something has been held in compression for a long time, when kinetic energy that wants to move has been kept still by circumstances that are now finally changing. The lock is turning, not metaphorically. In this image, something is actively moving toward the opening of what has been sealed. And whoever is watching this box, whatever part of you has been aware of it existing, has perhaps given up expecting this moment to actually arrive, has perhaps, in the quiet of recent seasons, started to wonder whether the waiting was for something real or for something that was always going to stay locked, regardless of how long or how faithfully you waited. The lock is turning. What is inside belongs to you. I want to talk about what jackpot actually means in this context, because I do not want this reading to stay at the level of vague abundance language that sounds good and delivers nothing specific. A jackpot is not simply a lot of something. A jackpot is a convergence, multiple things aligning simultaneously that individually would have been meaningful and together become transformative. The particular rarity of a jackpot is not just the size of what arrives, but the simultaneity of it. Several threads that have been developing independently in different areas, at different paces, arriving at the same moment and reinforcing each other rather than competing for the same limited resources. That is what I am seeing for you. Not one good thing, several good things whose arrival in the same window creates something larger than the sum of its individual parts. Let me try to describe the specific threads I am seeing, because I think naming them separately first will help you understand the full shape of what is converging. There is something in the area of recognition, not the performed kind, not flattery or social nicety, but the genuine article. Someone or something finally seeing accurately what you have been building and reflecting that accuracy back in a concrete form. This recognition has a material dimension to it. It does not stay in the realm of feeling seen. It produces something tangible. There is something in the area of connection, a relationship, romantic or otherwise, reaching a new depth or a new commitment or simply a new honesty that shifts the quality of how two people exist in relation to each other. Something that has been hovering in potential for too long, finally resolving into actual. And there is something in the area of internal arrival. This one is harder to describe because it does not produce an external event that anyone else would necessarily notice. It is the arrival of a quiet certainty about yourself, about who you are and what you are capable of, that has been just out of reach for a while. a settling into your own skin that changes the baseline tone of how you move through every other part of your life. These three threads are arriving together. That convergence is the jackpot. And I want to stay with what convergence actually feels like from the inside, because it is distinct from the experience of a single good thing arriving and deserves its own description. When one good thing arrives, the experience is relatively clean. Something happened, it was positive, you register it, you absorb it, you continue. When several things arrive simultaneously in the same window, reinforcing each other, the experience is considerably more disorienting. The usual mechanisms for processing a positive event are not scaled for multiple simultaneous inputs of this nature. You may find yourself cycling between the different threads rather than settling into any one of them, trying to take in the full picture and finding that the picture keeps expanding as you look at it. That is not a problem to be solved. That is simply what genuine abundance feels like to a person who has been calibrated to scarcity for long enough that their system does not immediately know what to do with the opposite. Give yourself time to adjust to the new volume. It will feel more manageable once the initial impact settles. I want to tell you something about the timing, because I know the timing has been a source of real frustration, and I want to address it directly rather than skating past it with vague reassurances. You have been waiting longer than felt reasonable, longer than you were prepared for when you first understood what you were hoping for, longer than people around you seem to be waiting for equivalent things in their own lives. Long enough that the wait itself became a kind of companion, familiar and unwelcome in the way that chronic discomforts become familiar, something you organized your inner life around rather than something you could simply ignore until it resolved. That length was not punishment. I see a structure behind the timing that I want to describe what is arriving, required conditions that did not previously exist, not in the world around you, though some of it involves that, in you. The version of you who is arriving at this moment is not the same version who first started waiting for it, and what is coming requires this version. The earlier version was not equipped to receive it fully, not because anything was wrong with the earlier version, but because what is arriving is specifically calibrated to what you are now. The waiting built the receiver. Without the specific length and specific difficulty of the waiting period, the version of you who could hold this properly would not exist yet. There is an image coming through now that I want to describe because it captures something the words have not quite reached yet. A field after rain. Everything saturated, the particular intensity of color that only happens when water has moved through dry ground and reached every root, and the whole landscape responds at once. Not one flower opening. Everything opening simultaneously, the way things open when conditions have finally been met after a long enough absence. That is the energy around you right now. Conditions met after a dry season long enough that the opening, when it comes, is not tentative or gradual. It is full and immediate and slightly overwhelming in the way that genuine abundance tends to be slightly overwhelming when it arrives after genuine scarcity. Let it be overwhelming. You do not have to manage its size into something more comfortable. You do not have to portion it out into digestible pieces so that nothing feels too large or too sudden or too good to be real. Let it be the full size of what it actually is. I want to speak to the part of you that is already composing a counter argument. The part that has been here before or close to here and has learned from those previous arrivals that what looks like the moment often turns out to be something less, that has calibrated its own responses downward over time to protect against the specific disappointment of believing in something that then did not hold. I understand that part. It was not wrong to develop. It was the appropriate response to a pattern that genuinely existed. But I want to offer you a piece of discernment rather than simply asking you to override the caution. Not all arrivals are the same. There is a difference between something that looks like a jackpot and something that is one. And the difference is visible if you know what to look for. A genuine convergence has a quality of internal coherence that temporary good fortune does not carry. The threads actually connect to each other. The recognition arrives from a direction that is consistent with genuine observation rather than performance. The relationship depth feels earned rather than sudden. When you look at what is arriving with clear eyes, not the clouded eyes of either false hope or excessive caution, but genuinely clear ones, you will be able to tell the difference. Trust that clarity. It is more reliable than either the hope or the caution. Trust that clarity. It is more reliable than either the hope or the caution. And I want to give you one specific way to access it in real time when the arrivals begin. Notice your body's response before your mind has had time to construct an interpretation. The body is considerably harder to fool than the mind. It responds to genuine versus performed before the cognitive machinery has processed what is happening. A genuine convergence produces a particular physical response, something in the chest that is different from the anxious hope flutter of wanting something to be real when it might not be. Something quieter and more settled, something that does not need to convince itself. If you feel that quiet, settled quality as what is arriving makes contact, trust it. That is your system recognizing the real thing. Let me describe one more image because it is the most specific thing I have seen in this reading, and I think it deserves its own space. I see a door that opens outward. The direction matters. A door that opens inward pulls you back with it, requires you to step back in order to let it open, creates a moment of retreat before advance is possible. A door that opens outward moves away from you, clears space rather than requiring it, invites forward movement as the natural and immediate response to its opening. This door opens outward. And what is visible beyond it is not darkness or uncertainty or the ambiguous light of a hallway that could lead anywhere. What is visible is a specific landscape, one you will recognize, not because you have been there before, but because it matches something you have been carrying internally as a reference point for so long that encountering its external equivalent feels like remembering rather than discovering. Walk through, not cautiously, not with one foot still on the threshold in case you need to retreat quickly, with the full commitment of someone who has been waiting long enough that hesitating at the actual moment of arrival would be its own kind of loss. Walk through, let it be the full size of what it actually is. I want to talk about something specific that tends to happen to people who have been waiting a long time for something significant, because I think naming it in advance will help you navigate it when it arrives. There is a particular kind of self-sabotage that does not look like sabotage from the inside. It looks like caution. It looks like realism. It looks like the mature and measured response of someone who has learned not to count chickens, not to invest too heavily before something is confirmed, not to reorganize their whole interior around a development that is not yet fully materialized. All of that sounds reasonable, but applied beyond its appropriate context, it becomes a mechanism for keeping yourself at a safe emotional distance from something you actually want to receive fully, for staying technically present while withholding the full investment that genuine receiving requires. Full receiving is not passive. It is an active opening, a decision made consciously and renewed repeatedly to let what is arriving actually arrive inside you rather than only adjacent to you. To allow it to matter out loud in the full size of how much it actually matters, rather than in the reduced version that feels safer to display. The jackpot cannot be received from a safe emotional distance. It requires you to be present for it in the specific, full, a slightly vulnerable way that only becomes possible when you stop protecting yourself against the possibility of losing something and simply allow yourself to have it. Practice that opening. It may feel unfamiliar at first. Do it anyway. I want to address you directly now, without image or metaphor, because I think this moment in the reading calls for something more plain spoken. You are someone who has put in the kind of work that most people abandon when it stops producing visible returns quickly enough, who has maintained integrity in seasons that gave you very little external incentive to do so, who has continued becoming more yourself, even in the stretches where becoming more yourself seemed to cost more than it produced. That is not ordinary. It does not get celebrated in real time the way more visible forms of effort get celebrated. Nobody throws a parade for the daily, unglamorous discipline of continuing to show up as your full self when the easier option is available and frequently looks more rewarding in the short term. But it accumulates. Everything you chose to do correctly when the correct choice was also the harder choice. Every moment you held your standard when relaxing, it would have been forgivable. Every day you continued moving towards something invisible because you knew in some place deeper than certainty that it was real and it was yours. All of it was being counted, not by any external authority, by the mechanics of what you were building inside yourself, by the simple, unglamorous, entirely reliable logic that who you become through the process of pursuing something shapes what you are capable of receiving when it finally arrives. You are capable of this now. That is not an accident. You are capable of this now. That is not an accident. I want to add something to that because I think the relationship between what you built and what is arriving deserves more than a passing mention. What you built during the waiting period is not separate from what is arriving. It is causally connected to it. The recognition that is coming because of who you became in the process of waiting. The relationship depth that is arriving because the person you are now is capable of sustaining it in a way an earlier version of you might not have. The internal settling, the quiet certainty is arriving because you have done enough of the right things for long enough that the uncertainty no longer has a foothold. Each of those three threads connects back to something you did or chose or sustained during the period that felt like it was producing nothing. The waiting was not wasted time waiting for the jackpot to arrive. The waiting was the mechanism that produced the conditions for the jackpot to be possible. That reframe is not just comforting semantics. It is structurally accurate, and understanding it that way changes the relationship you have with future difficult periods because you have now lived the complete arc of a situation where persisting through something that seemed to be producing nothing eventually produced everything. You have evidence now, real evidence, drawn from your own actual life, that this is how it sometimes works. As we close, I want to say one thing simply and let it land without elaboration. The jackpot is real. The moment is actual. What is arriving is not a version of what you hoped for that has been reduced by circumstances into something slightly less than the original vision. It is the original vision, arriving in the form reality takes rather than the form imagination constructs, which is always slightly messier and more surprising and more genuinely human than anything the imagination produces in advance. That messiness is not a flaw in the arrival. It is proof that what arrived is actual and not a curated version of itself, designed to match your expectations perfectly at the expense of being real. Receive it in the form it actually comes. That form is enough, more than enough. Drop something below if you already feel this shift happening at the edges of your life. Tell me what thread is most alive for you right now. I read everything, every single one,